Ashram, Sripad, Srila Bhakti, Pavan, Janardan, Maharaj ki jai.
Bandeham Shiguro Shira Parakamalam Shigurun Vaishnavam Sya Shirupam Sagrajatam Saganaraganatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sabazutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Paran Sahagana Lalita Shivashikam Vidam Sya Om Agyana Timrandasya Gyanajana Shalaka Chakshuru militam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Gorva Bhishtam Supurakam Gurganara Shisha Sambhushitam Chintya Chintya Samasta Veda Nipanam Shri Rupa Patanugam Govindabhidam Ujvalam Bharatanum Bhaktyan Vidam Sundaram Vande Vishwa Guruncha Divyat Bhagavat Prem Noe Bija Pradam Devam Divyatanam Suchanda Balanam Balarka Shelanshitam Sandrananda Puram Sadekavaranam Vairagya Vidyamburim Sri Siddhanta Nidhim Subhakti Lasitam Saraswatanam Baram Bandetam Shubhadam Madhika Sharanam Nyashishwara Sridharam Vanchakalpatarubhyasya Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanibhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Namo Mahabaranyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namane Gauratavishe Namah. So we're hearing from Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita by Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, translation and commentary by Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. This is Antya-lila, Chapter 20, the Shikshastaka prayers, and this is verses number 96 through 98. Shri Govinda, Sri Chaitanya, Sri Nityananda, Sri Advaita, Sri Bhakta Ara, Sri Shrotri Brinda, Sri Swarup, Sri Rupa, Sri Sanatan, Sri Raghunath Das, Sri Guru, Sri Jiva Charan, Iha Sabar Charana Kripai Lekaya Amare Ara Eg Hoi Teho Ati Kripa Kore. I'm writing this book by the mercy of the lotus feet of Sri Govinda, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Lord Nityananda, Advaita Acharya, other devotees, and the readers of this book, as well as Swarup Damodar Goswami, Sri Rupa Goswami, Sri Sanatana Goswami, Sri Raghunath Das Goswami, who is my spiritual master, and Sri Jiva Goswami. I have also been specifically favored by another Supreme Personality. So Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami is writing here. I'm writing this book by the mercy of the lotus feet of Sri Govinda Dev, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Lord Nityananda, Advaita Acharya, other devotees, and the readers of this book, as well as Swarup Damodar Goswami, Sri Rupa Goswami, Sri Sanatana Goswami, Sri Raghunath Das Goswami, who is my spiritual master, and Sri Jiva Goswami. I have also been specifically favored by another Supreme Personality. Shri Maran Gopal More Lekaya Agya Kori Kohitena Jujai Tabu Rohitena Pari. Shri Madan Mohan, deity of Vrindavan, has given the order that is making me write. Although this should not be disclosed, I disclose it because I am unable to remain silent. So here, reverse to Shri Madan Gopal. Shri Madan Gopal is Shri Madan Mohan. Shri Madan Mohan, deity of Vrindavan, has given the order that is making me write. Although this should not be disclosed, I disclose it because I am unable to remain silent. Na kohite hoy mora krite nata dosh, dhamma kori boli shrota na koriya rosh. If I did not disclose this fact, I would be guilty of ingratitude to the Lord. Therefore, my dear readers, please do not consider me too proud and be angry at me. Toma sabar charana duli korinu bandan tate Chaitanya lila hoila jay kichulikan It is because I have offered my prayers unto the lotus feet of all of you that whatever I have written about Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has been possible. Ebe Antya-lila ganer kori anubad anuvara koile pai lila ashwad. Now let me repeat all the pastimes of the Antya-lila, for if I do so, I shall taste the pastimes again. Now let me repeat all the pastimes of the Antya-lila, for if I do so, I shall taste the pastimes again. Pratama parichede rupera dvitiyam milan Taramadye duinatakera vidana shravan. The first chapter describes how Rupa Goswami met Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu for the second time and how the Lord heard his two dramas, Vidagdha Madhava and Lalita Madhava. Taramadye Shivananda Sange Kurkuraila Prabhutare Krishna Kahan Mukta Korila. That chapter also describes the incident of Shivananda Sen's dog, who was induced by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to chant the holy name of Krishna and was thus liberated. Dvitiya Chota Haridase Koraila Shikan Taramadye Shivananda Ascharya Darshan. The second chapter tells how the Lord instructively punished Junior Haridas. Also in that chapter is a description of the wonderful vision of Shivananda Sen. Tritiya Haridaser Mahima Prachanda Damodar Pandit Koila Prabhure Bhaktivedanta. In the third chapter is a description of the forceful glories of Haridas Thakur. That chapter also mentions how Damodar Pandit spoke words of criticism to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Prabhu Nama Diya Koila Brahmanda Mochan Haridas Korila Namer Mahimastapan. The third chapter also tells how Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu delivered everyone by bestowing upon the universe the holy name of the Lord, and it describes how Haridas Thakur established the glories of the holy name by his practical example. Chaturte Shri Sanataner Dvitiya Milan Deha Tyaga Hoite Tara Korila Rakan. The fourth chapter describes Sanatana Goswami's second visit with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and how the Lord saved him from committing suicide. Jaishta Masara Dupe Tare Koila Parikan Shakti Sancharya Puna Pataila Brindavan. The fourth chapter also tells how Sanatana Goswami was tested in the sunshine of Jaishta, May, June, and was then empowered and sent back to Vrindavan. Panchame Pradyumna Mishre Prabhu Kripa Korila Rai Dwara Krishna Kata Tarishunaila. The fifth chapter tells how the Lord showed his favor to Pradyumna Mishra and made him hear topics of Krishna from Ramananda Raya. Taramadye Bangala Kaviraj-nataka Upekan Swarup Gosai Koila Vigra Harer Mahimastapan. That chapter also describes how Swarup Damodar rejected the drama of a poet from Bengal and established the glories of the deity. Shaste Raghunatha Das Prabhure Milila Nityananda Agyaya Chira Mahotsava Koila. The sixth chapter describes how Raghunath Das Goswami met Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and performed the Chirdoi festival in accordance with Nityananda Prabhu's order. Chira is like rice flakes and doi yogurt. Performed the Chirdoi festival in accordance with Nityananda Prabhu's order. Damodar Swarup Hare Samarpila Govardhana Shila Gunja Mala Taredila. That chapter also tells how the Lord entrusted Raghunath Das Goswami to the care of Swarup Damodar Goswami and gave Raghunath Das the gift of a stone from Govardhan Hill and a garland of Gunja, like Gunja Mala. Saptama Parichede Vala. Gunja is like, they look like either seeds or beans and different, some white and some red, like that. And they're strung usually on like a garland made from them. Saptama Parichede Vallabha Bhata Mila Nanamate Koila Tara Garva Khandan. The 7th chapter tells how Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu met Vallabha Bhatta and dismantled his false pride in various ways. Ashtame Ramachandra Purer Agaman Tarabaye Koila Prabhu Bika Sankochan. The 8th chapter describes the arrival of Ramachandra Puri and how Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu minimized his eating due to fear of him. Navame Gopinatha Patanayaka Mochan Sri Jagat Tera Lok Prabhur Darshan. In the 9th chapter is a description of how Gopinath Patanayaka was delivered and how the people of the 3 worlds were able to see Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Dashame Kohilun Bhakta Datta Ashwadan Raghava Panditera Tahan Jalira Sajan. In the 10th chapter, I have described how Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu tasted the food given by his devotees, and I have also described the assortment of prasadam in the bags of Raghava Pandit. Taramadje Govindera Koila Parikan Taramadje Parimunda Rityara Varnan. Also in that chapter is a description of how the Lord examined Govinda and how he danced in the temple. Ekadashe Haridas Thakur Niyan Bhaktivatsaya Jahan Dekaila Gaura Bhagavan. Ekadashe Haridas Thakur Nirjan Bhaktivatsaya Jahan Dekaila Gaura Bhagavan. The 11th chapter describes the disappearance of Haridas Thakur and how Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, showed his affection for his devotees. Dwadashe Jagannandar Taila Banjan Nityananda Koila Shivanandare Taran. In the 12th chapter are descriptions of how Jagannatha Pandit broke a pot of oil and how Lord Nityananda chastised Shivananda's sin. How Lord Nityananda chastised Shivananda's sin. Trayodashe Jagannananda Mathura Jayala Mahaprabhu Deva Dashir Gita Shunila. The 13th chapter tells how Jagannatha Pandit went to Mathura and returned, and how Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu by chance heard a song sung by a Devadasi dancing girl. Raghunath Padacharjir Tahai Milan Prabhutare Kripakore Bhataila Brindavan. Also in the 13th chapter is an account of how Raghunath Bhatta met Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who by his causeless mercy sent him to Vrindavan. That's Raghunath Bhatta Goswami. Chaturda She Divyonmara Ramba Varnan Sharira Eta Prabhur Managela Brindavan. The 14th chapter describes the beginning of the Lord's spiritual trance, in which his body was at Jagannath Puri, but his mind was in Vrindavan. Taramadye Prabhur Simadware Patan Ashtisandi Tyaga Anubhavera Udgam. Also in that chapter is a description of how Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu fell down in front of the Simadwar gate of the Jagannath temple, his bones separated at the joints, and how various transcendental symptoms awakened in him. Chatur Parvata Deki Prabhur Daban Taramade Prabhur Kichu Pralapa Varnan. Also in that chapter is a description of how Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ran toward Chatak Parvat and spoke like a madman. Panchadasa Parichede Udyana Vilase Vrindavana Brahme Jahan Korila Praveshe. The 15th chapter is a description of how Mahaprabhu entered a garden on the seashore. The 15th chapter is a description of how Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu entered a garden on the seashore and mistook it for Vrindavan. Taramadye Prabhur Panchendriya Akarshan Taramadye Korila Rashe Krishna Anveshan. Also in that chapter is a description of the attraction of Lord Chaitanya's 5 senses to Krishna, and how he searched for Krishna in the rasa dance. Shodashe Kalidase Prabhu Kripa Korila Vaishnavo Chishta Kaibara Phala Dekaila. The 16th chapter tells how Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu showed his mercy to Kalidas and thus demonstrated the result of eating the remnants of the food of Vaishnavas. Shivanandar Balake Shloka Koraila Simadware Dwari Prabhure Krishna Dekaila. It also describes how Shivananda sends. It also describes how Shivananda's son composed a verse, and how the doorkeeper of the Simadwara showed Krishna to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Mahaprashader Tahan Mahima Barnila Krishna-karnamrita Phala Shloka Shwarila. Also in that chapter, the glories of Mahaprasadam are explained, and a verse is tasted describing the effect of nectar from the lips of Krishna. Saptadashe Gabimadye Prabhurapatan Kormakara Anubhaver Tahai Udgam. The 17th chapter recounts how Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu fell among the cows and assumed the form of a tortoise as his ecstatic emotions awakened. Krishnara Shabdagune Prabhur Mana Akarshila Kashtri Angate Shlokara Arta Aveshikorila. That chapter also tells how the attributes of Krishna's sound attracted the mind of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who then described in ecstasy the meaning of the Kastriyangate verse. Bhava Shabhaye Puna Koila Pralapan Krishna Krishna-karnamrita shloker arta koila vivaran. The 17th chapter also tells how Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, due to the conjunction of various ecstatic emotions, again began speaking like a madman and described in detail the meaning of a verse from the Krishna-karnamrita. Ashtadasa parichede samudre patan Krishna gopi jala kili tahandarshan. In the 18th chapter is an account of how the Lord fell into the ocean and in ecstasy saw in a dream the pastimes of a water fight between Krishna and the gopis. Dahai dekila Krishna banya bhojan Jalia utaila prabhu aila swab bhavan. In that dream, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's picnic in that dream, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu saw Krishna's picnic in the forest. As Lord Chaitanya floated in the sea, a fisherman caught him, and then the Lord returned to his own residence. All this is recounted in the 18th chapter. Una vimshe bitye prabhur mukha sangarshan Krishnera viraha svurti pralapa varnan. In the 19th chapter is a description of how Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu rubbed his face against the walls and spoke like a madman because of separation from Krishna. Vasanta Rajanite Pushpo Jhane Viharan Krishnera Saurabhyal Shloker Arta Vivaran. That chapter also describes Krishna's wandering in a garden on a spring night, and it fully describes the meaning of a verse about the scent of Krishna's body. Vimsha Parichede Nitya Nidja Shikshastaka Padiya Tara Arta Ashwadila Brahmavistahaya. The 20th chapter tells how Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu recited his own 8 stanzas, Shikshastaka, of instruction and tasted their meaning and ecstatic love. Bhakti Shikaite Jai Shikashtaka Kohila Se Shloka Shtakera Arta Puna Ashwadila. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu composed those 8 stanzas to instruct the devotees, but he also personally tasted their meaning. Mukya mukya lilar arta korilun katan anubad hoite smare granta vivaran. I have thus repeated the principal pastimes and their meaning, for by such repetition one can remember the descriptions in the book. Ek paricheder kata aneka prakar mukya mukya kohilun kata najai vistar. In every chapter there are various topics, but I have repeated only those that are principal, for not all of them could be described again. Shri Radha Saha Shri Madana Mohan Shri Radha Saha Shri Govinda Charan Shri Radha Saha Shri Gopinath 18 Thakur Hoy Godi Jaranat. The Vrindavan deities of Madan Mohan was Srimati Radharani, Govinda was Srimati Radharani, and Gopinath was Srimati Radharani, are the life and soul of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas. Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Sri Juta Nityananda, Sri Advaita Charya, Sri Gaurabhakta Vrinda, Sri Swarup, Sri Rupa, Sri Sanatan, Shri Guru, Shri Raghunatha, Shri Jiva Charan, Nijat Shire Dari E Sabara Charan, Jahoite hoi sab vanshita puran. So that my desires may be fulfilled, I have placed the lotus feet of these personalities on my head. Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu with Lord Nityananda, Advaita Acharya and their devotees, as well as Sri Swarup Damodar Goswami, Sri Rupa Goswami, Sri Sanatana Goswami, Sri Raghunath Das Goswami, who is my spiritual master, and Srila Jiva Goswami. Srila Raghunath Das Goswami was the instructing spiritual master of Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami and has therefore been described as Sri Guru. Sabar Charana Kripa Guru Upadhyai Morabani Shishya Kore Bahutan Nachai. The mercy of their lotus feet. The mercy of their lotus feet is my spiritual master. My words are my disciples, whom I have made dance in various ways. Sishyara Shramanadeki Guru Nachan Rakila Kripana Nachai Bani Vasya Rohila. Seeing the fatigue of the disciples, the spiritual master has stopped making them dance. And because that mercy no longer makes them dance, my words now sit silently. Ani puna bani apane nachite na jane jata nachaila nachi korila vishrame. My inexperienced words do not know how to dance by themselves. The mercy of the Guru made them dance as much as possible, and now after dancing they have taken rest. Sab Shrota Ganer Kori Chanana Bandhan Jan Sabar Chanana Kripa Shubera Karan. So his words are like his disciples, and after dancing for a long time, now they have taken rest. I now worship the lotus feet of my readers, for by the mercy of their lotus feet, there is all good fortune. Chaitanya Charitamrita Jai Jana Shune Tara Charana Nua Karon Muni Pane. If one hears the pastimes of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as described in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, I wash his lotus feet and drink the water. Shrotara Pararenu Karon Mastaka Bhushan Tomar E Amrita Paile Safala Hoila Shram. I decorate my head with the dust of the lotus feet of my audience. Now you have all drunk this nectar, and therefore my labor is successful. Shri Rupa Raghunath Parijara As Chaitanya Charitamrita Kohe Krishnadas. Praying at the lotus feet of Shri Rupa and Shri Raghunath, always desiring their mercy, I Krishnadas narrate Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita following in their footsteps. Charitam Amritam Etats Chila Chaitanya Vishnu Shubhadam Ashubhan Nashi Shradayas Svarayed Yaha Tad Amala Para Padme Bringatam Etya Soyam Rasajati Rasam Uchai Prema Madhabika Puram. Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita is filled with the activities of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself. It invokes all good fortune and destroys everything inauspicious. If one tastes the nectar of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita with faith and love, I become like a bumblebee tasting the honey of transcendental love from his lotus feet. Shriman Marana Gopal Govinda Deva Dushtaye Chaitanya Arpitam Ashtvetats Chaitanya Charitamritam. Since this book, Chaitanya Charitamrita, is now complete, having been written for the satisfaction of the most opulent deities, Madan Mohanji and Govindaji, let it be offered at the lotus feet of Sri Krishna Chaitanya Dev. Parimal Vashita Bhuvanam Swaras Rason Madita Rasagya Rolambam Giridhara Charanam Bojam Kakalu Rasika Samhate Hatum. Realized devotees are like bumblebees, manned by their own mellows, or manned by their own rasas at Krishna's lotus feet. The scent of those lotus feet perfumes the entire world. Who is the realized soul that could give them up? Who is the realized soul that could? Realized devotees are like bumblebees, manned by their own mellows at Krishna's lotus feet. The scent of those lotus feet perfumes the entire world. Who is the realized soul that could give them up? Shake Shind Vagni Vanindo Jaishte Brindavan Antare Suryahe Sita Panchamyam Grantoyam Purnatam Gata Shake Sinvagni Vanendo Jaishte Vrindavanantare Suryahe Sita Panchamyam Grantoyam Purnatam Gataha. In Vrindavan, in the year 1537 Shakabda era, which is AD 1615, in the month of Jaishta, May, June, on Sunday, the 5th day of the wandering moon, Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita has been completed. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta reports to Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita Antya-lila, 13th chapter, describing the meaning of the Shikshastaka and how the Lord tasted it himself. End of the Antya-lila. So that's the end of the book also. So, concluding words. Today, Sunday, November 10th, 1974, corresponding to the 10th of Kartik, Chaitanya era 488, the 11th day of the dark fortnight, the Rama Ekadasi. We have now finished the English translation of Sri Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, in accordance with the authorized order of His Divine Grace Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Goswami Maharaj, my beloved eternal spiritual master, guide, and friend. Although according to material vision, His Divine Grace Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada passed away from this material world on the last day of December 1936, I still consider His Divine Grace to be always present with me by His Vani, His words. There are two ways of association, by Vani and by Vapu. Vani means words and Vapu means physical presence. Physical presence is sometimes appreciable and sometimes not, but Vani continues to exist eternally. Therefore, we must take example of the Vani, of the Vani, not the physical presence. The Bhagavad Gita, for example, is the Vani of Lord Krishna. Although Krishna was personally present 5,000 years ago and is no longer physically present from the materialistic point of view, the Bhagavad Gita continues. In this connection, we may call to mercy, in this connection, we may call to memory the time when I was fortunate enough to meet His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada sometime in the year 1922. Srila Prabhupada had come to Calcutta from Sridham Mayapur to start the missionary activities of the Gaudiya Math. He was sitting in a house at Uttadanga when, through the inducement of an intimate friend, the late Sriman Narendranath Malik, I had the opportunity to meet His Divine Grace for the first time. That's Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Prabhupada met with him. I had the opportunity to meet His Divine Grace for the first time. I do not remember the actual date of the meeting, but at that time it was one of the managers of Dr. Bosch's laboratory in Calcutta. I was a newly married young man, addicted to Gandhi's movement and dressed in khadi. Fortunately, even at our first meeting, His Divine Grace advised me to preach the cult of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in English in the Western countries, because at that time I was a complete nationalist, a follower of Mahatma Gandhi. I submitted to His Divine Grace that unless our country were freed from foreign subjugation, no one would hear the message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu seriously. Of course, we had some argument on this subject, but at last I was defeated and convinced that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's message is the only panacea for suffering humanity. I was also convinced that the message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was then in the hands of a very expert devotee, and that surely the message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would spread all over the world. I could not, however, immediately take up his instructions to preach, but I took his words very seriously and was always thinking of how to execute his order, although I was quite unfit to do so. In this way, I passed my life as a householder until 1950, then probably was about 55. In this way, I passed my life as a householder until 1950, when I retired from family life as a vanaprastha. With no companion, I loitered here and there until 1958, when I took sannyas. Then I was completely ready to discharge the order of my spiritual master. Previously, in 1936, just before His Divine Grace passed away at Jagannath-puri, I wrote him a letter asking him what I could do to serve him. In reply, he wrote me a letter dated 13th December 1936, ordering me in the same way to preach in English the cult of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as I had heard it from him. As he passed away, I started the fortnightly magazine. After he passed away, I started the fortnightly magazine Back to Godhead sometime in 1944 and tried to spread the cult of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu through this magazine. After I took sannyas, a well-wishing friend suggested that I write books instead of magazines. Magazines, he said, might be thrown away, but books remain perpetually. Then I attempted to write Srimad Bhagavatam. Before that, when I was a householder, I had written on Srimad Bhagavad Gita and had completed about 1,100 pages. But somehow or other, the manuscript was stolen. In any case, when I had published Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, in 3 volumes in India, I thought of going to the USA. By the order of His Divine Grace, I was able to come to New York on September 17, 1965. Since then, I've translated many books, including Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, Summary, and many others. In the meantime, I was induced to translate Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita and publish it in an elaborate version. In his leisure time in later life, His Divine Grace, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, would simply read Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. It was his favorite book. He used to say that there would be a time when foreigners would learn the Bengali language to read the Chaitanya Charitamrita. The work on this translation began about 18 months ago. Now, by the grace of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and His Divine Grace Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, it is finished. In this connection, I have to thank my American disciples, especially Sriman Pradyumna Das Adhikari, Sriman Nitai Das Adhikari, Sriman Jayadev Das Brahmachari, and many other boys and girls who are sincerely helping me in writing, editing, and publishing all these literatures. I think about His Divine Grace, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. I think that His Divine Grace, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, is always seeing my activities and guiding me within my heart by His words. As it is said in Srimad Bhagavatam, Tene Brahma Rida Ya Adikavaye. Spiritual inspiration comes from within the heart, wherein the Supreme Personality of Godhead in His Paramatma feature is always sitting with all His devotees and associates. It is to be admitted that whatever translation work I have done is through the inspiration of my spiritual master, because personally I am most insignificant and incompetent to do this materially impossible work. I do not think myself a very learned scholar, but I have full faith in the service of my spiritual master, His Divine Grace, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. If there is any credit to my activities of translating, it is all due to His Divine Grace. Certainly, if His Divine Grace were physically present at this time, it would have been a great occasion for jubilation. But even though He is not physically present, I'm confident that He is very much pleased by this work of translation. He was very fond of seeing many books published to spread the Krishna consciousness movement. Therefore, our society, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, has been formed to execute the order of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and His Divine Grace, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. It is my wish that devotees of Lord Chaitanya all over the world enjoy this translation, and I am glad to express my gratitude to the learned men in the Western countries who are so pleased with my work that they are ordering in advance all my books that will be published in the future. On this occasion, therefore, I request my disciples who are determined to help me in this work to continue their cooperation fully, so that philosophers, scholars, religionists, and people in general all over the world will benefit by reading our transcendental literatures such as Srimad Bhagavatam and Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports to Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, dated November 10, 1974, at the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, Hare Krishna Land, Juhu, Bombay. Well, that's the conclusion of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Hari Haraya Nama Krishna Jadavaya Nama Hari Haraya Nama Krishna Jadavaya Nama Jadavaya Madhavaya Keshavaya Nama Jadavaya Madhavaya Keshavaya Nama Gopal Govinda Ram Shri Madhusudan Gopal Govinda Ram Shri Madhusudan Giridhari Gopinatha Marana Mohan Giridhari Gopinatha Marana Mohan Sri Chaitanya Nityananda Sri Advaita Chandra Sri Chaitanya Nityananda Sri Advaita Chandra Gadadara Shiva Sadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Gadadara Shiva Sadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jai Rupa Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath Jai Rupa Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath Sri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasa Raghunath Sri Gopala Bhatta Dasa Raghunath H.I. Gosai Kori Charana Bandhan H.I. Gosai Kori Charana Bandhan Jahoite Vignana Shabishta Puran Hoite Vignana Shabishta Puran H.I. Gosai Jar Mui Taradas H.I. Gosai Jar Mui Taradas Tasabar Padarenu Mora Panchagras Tasabar Padarenu Mora Panchagras Tader Charana Sevi Bhakta Sanibas Tader Charana Sevi Bhakta Sanibas Janame Janame More Ambilas Janame Janame More Ambilas H.I. Gosai Jabe Branche Koilabas H.I. Gosai Jabe Branche Koilabas Radha Krishna Nitya-lila Korila Prakash Radha Krishna Nitya-lila Korila Prakash Anande Bolo Hari Bhansha Vrindavan Anande Bolo Hari Bhansha Vrindavan Shri Guru Vaishnava Pade Manchayaman Shri Guru Vaishnava Pade Manchayaman Shri Guru Vaishnava Pad Padma Koryash Shri Guru Vaishnava Pad Padma Koryash Harinam Sankirtana Kohe Naratamodas Harinam Sankirtana Kohe Naratamodas Shri Guru Vaishnava Pad Padma Koryash Shri Guru Vaishnava Pad Padma Koryash Harinam Sankirtana Kohe Naratamodas Harinam Sankirtana Kohe Naratamodas Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Nitai Gaura Haribo, 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 Haribo. Haribo, 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 Nitai Gaura Haribo, 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 Nitai Gaura Haribo, 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 Haribo. Jayom Vishnupad Paramahansa Parabhajaka Charyashta Tara Sadashi Shimad Srila Bhakti's Jai Saparikara Shishi Guru Guranga Gandharvika Giridhari Juki Jai Jayom Vishnupad Paramahansa Parabhajaka Charyashta Tara Sadashi Shimad Srila Bhakti Nirmamacharya Maharaj Ki Jai Jayom Vishnupad Paramahansa Parabhajaka Charyashta Tara Sadashi Shimad Srila Bhakti Sundar Govinda Dev Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai Jayom Vishnupad Paramahansa Parabhajaka Charyashta Tara Sadashi Shimad Srila Bhakti Rakshidhar Dev Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai Jai Bhagavan Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Thakur Ki Jai Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Satchidananda Bhaktivedanta Thakur Ki Jai Jai Om Vishnupad Vaishnava Sarvabhauma Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai Rupanuga Guru Varga Ki Jai Namachari Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Shri Rupa Sanatana Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jiva Gopal Bhattadasha Raghunath Shad Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai Prem Se Go Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasudeva Shri Gaura Bhaktivedanta Ki Jai Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita Ki Jai Srila Vrindavan Das Thakur Ki Jai Sri Chaitanya Bhagwat Ki Jai Narottam Srinivas Shyamananda Prabhu Ki Jai Vishwavaranya Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Jayom Vishnupad Paramahansa Parabhajaka Charyashta Tara Sadashi Shimad Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Navadip Dham Ki Jai Shri Ram Mayapur Ki Jai Saparshada Shri Nityananda Prabhu Ki Jai Saparshada Shriman Mahaprabhu Ki Jai Shri Kuladvip Ki Jai Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mat Ki Jai Soquel Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Seva Ashram Ki Jai Ganga Devi Ki Jai Tulasi Maharani Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Shri Radha Krishna Go Gopi Govardhan Sham Kuna Radha Kunda Kalindi Yamuna Jo Ki Jai Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Jagannath Jo Ki Jai Bhakti Vigna Vinashaya Shri Nishingadev Ki Jai Bhakta Prabhara Shri Prahlad Maharaj Ki Jai Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai all the assembled devotees Ki Jai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bo
Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Bhakti Pavan Janardan Maharaj Ki Jai